head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It is primary day. That's right. 8 states across the country, primaries. Alabama, California, New Jersey, the great state of Iowa, Montana, Mississippi with all the S's, New Mexico, and South Dakota. Lots of races in all of those places to be keeping an eye on. Personally, there are a couple that I'm particularly interested in. We talked to 2 guys last night that I like a lot. Mike Levin in the 49th, and also Andrew Jans in the 22nd. I also like Andy Thorburn. We'll see how he does in it. And probably one of the weirdest of races, because there are like 100 people running in that race. So you could probably get to the top 2 spots with like 6% of the vote. So that will be a wild one. And look, California, with their jungle primary, whatever going on, where the top 2 vote getters get, you could have scenarios where, either party are completely blocked out. So that will be fun. Lots of races there to watch. Also, I'm going to be watching out in New Jersey, as I hope, Lisa McCormick takes out Robert Menendez, send him and all his problems away. I would like to see Kathy Glasson in Iowa get the nod for the gubernatorial race. It's going to be interesting to find out what Republican's going to run against Tester in Montana. Lots stuff. New Mexico could be a place where Democrats pick up a governorship. Also, I'm watching the Bill McCamley race. For auditor, if you remember the wall video, if you haven't seen it, it is fantastic. And I tweeted it out earlier today. Also, South Dakota, a couple of interesting little tidbits, not much in the way of flipping any seats, because South Dakota is way gone. But there's an interesting battle to replace their governor. One of the 2 Republican candidates, Representative Kristi Noem, if you may remember her, she claimed to be the small family farmer who their family almost lost the farm because of a death in the family. Turns out her father died in a tragic accident while working the farm. And, the reports are all over the place. I've read a number of reports that said, the amount of the estate tax wasn't an awful lot, shouldn't have put the family into a decade of debt, as Noam points out. And also they had like well over $1 million in life insurance, which they could have easily paid the estate tax with. But again, that narrative that the right loves to throw out. Now, she hasn't brought that up during this campaign season because lies tend to get checked out. But, or they used to anyway. So we'll see how that plays out. So a big day, lots to get to, lots to look at as the returns come in, as we see some things that I'll be keeping an eye on. I'm going to throw it out there. But a big day. I hope everyone got out, cast their ballot. I hope everyone had their, again, this is one of those things where tomorrow, if you're in one of these 8 states and you didn't vote, shut up. I mean, it's always been my view. If you don't get out and vote, if you don't participate, shut up. No more complaining. I don't want to hear it. Enough. So there you go. New report out today by the good folks at the Corporate Research Project of Good Jobs First and Jobs with Justice Education Fund, basically saying what we already knew. We're making wage theft great again. That's right. A lot of big corporations clawing back some funding for themselves because, hey, got big bonuses to pay to the executives, got those huge salaries to pay because, hey, the golden parachute has to be funded one way or the other. And according to the big report, and this is one of those things where, we knew this, not surprising, wage theft is really out of control. And what they point out is since 2000, they analyzed 1,200 successful wage theft litigation cases, lawsuits. And what they found is that in these 1,200 successful cases, about $8.8 billion was stolen from workers. And you're talking about cashiers and security guards and financial advisors and retail workers and go down the bankers and go down the list, pharmaceutical reps, go down the list of workers. They're getting ripped off. And as one of the authors points out, this wage theft goes well beyond the thought of sweatshops or fast food joints. Because when you think of wage theft, you think of the most vulnerable workforce, which are those people, the minimum wage workers at the bottom, getting cheated out of their 15 minutes of break, or getting cheated out of their lunch, or, being forced to work, a half an hour after work, off the clock, because, we'll make it up to you. But what they found is, guess what? Wasn't that at all. In fact, they found out that, not surprisingly, the most penalized company in the country is, guess who? And you would be correct if you said Walmart. About $1.4 billion in wage theft settlements and fines claims, followed by FedEx. And me being in the trucking industry, no question that I agree with FedEx being the number two. And then you get to the other ones: Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, State Farm Insurance. And you go, wait a second, I thought this were just, kids getting cheated out of their breaks. No, and the money's, not cheap either. I mean, Wells Fargo got hit with $381 million. Bank of America, $381 million. Wells Fargo, $205 million. JP Morgan Chase, $160 million. And State Farm, State Farm! You're $140 million in wage theft. Now, what they came across by industry, and not surprisingly, $2.7 billion were in the retail industry, $1.4 billion in financial, almost $1 billion in freight and logistics. And again, not surprising to me that truck drivers would be getting screwed in all of this. Also, business services and insurance, those were the other ones. Now, there were a number that they tried to look at, evidently 127 additional cases, that they tried to look at involving 89 really big companies, the Fortune 500 kind, that evidently settled their agreements with confidentiality clauses. So we don't get to know what happened at AT&T. We don't get to know what happened at Home Depot or Verizon or Comcast or Lowe's or Best Buy. We don't get to know any of that because they're all sealed. And you go, well, that's not right. And you're right, it's not. But the reason that I bring this up is, I've seen statistics that say, wage theft in this country is far more costly to the working class than, all of the bank robberies, all of the liquor store holdups, all of the gas station stick-ups, all of the burglaries, all of the, getting mugged on the street corner, all of that stuff combined. So for those people who are worried about, holding on to your wallet as you're walking down the street because you might be in a dark alley somewhere, chances are you're getting robbed more often by your boss than you are in a dark alley by somebody jumping out of a crevice. That's just the reality of it. And here's the thing, and this is where, as I was thinking this through, you actually have a better chance of fighting back against the guy in the alley with the knife or the gun than you do against your boss. And the reason I bring that up is because guess what just happened within the last couple of weeks? That's right. This U.S. Supreme Court decided in the Epic Systems cases that, or the trio of cases that went with that, that you're now, as a matter of constitutional law, no longer going to have access to the courts. Aren't you happy about that? Aren't you happy that you willingly gave up your constitutional right to sue your employer for stealing from you in favor of mandatory forced arbitration, to where you get to go to a private kangaroo court that's, you know, basically funded by the employer? Isn't that cute? Isn't that wonderful? Don't you love that? Because I can tell you, I find it rather comical that all of this stuff plays out. And I look at this study and not surprising. You know, it's not surprising that workers in this country are getting ripped off every day by their employer. And we're so afraid, and this is the weird thing, we're so afraid of, you know, the guy in the alley, or, you know, oh, there's someone following me, or, you know, there's that gang of teenagers over there. They're going to, you know, steal my purse or steal my wallet. When the reality is, it's the person that we spend the most of our time with. They're the one robbing us blind. It's really, really sad. And, you know, as I sat and I thought about this, because it's a foreign concept to me, and you can ask any union member in this country, it is a foreign concept to them as well. Because I can honestly say, in all of my work years, while working as a union worker, I have never lost a dime to wage theft. Now, there were numerous times, and, you know, anybody who knows me knows that there were numerous times that my employer tried. There were times where they'd say, well, we're going to deduct this 0.2 or this 0.1, and, you know, just trying to nickel and dime you around the edges. And the very next day, in came a piece of paper with my name on it and their name on it, and a little written blurb about it. It's called a grievance. And my union looked at it and said, yep, you owe this guy this, and they paid it. And it's one of these things that's really very foreign to me, that you would put up with having your wages stolen. You give up moments of your life. You give up time with your children. You give up time with your wife. You give up time, you know, doing whatever it is that you do so that you can work for this employer to collect a paycheck and earn wages. And they're going to steal those wages from you. And you would want no recourse. This is just, I mean, it's another one of those things where you go, I just don't understand how it is that working people in this country have put themselves into the mess that we're in by saying, we don't need those stinking unions. You go, really? Very, very twisted to me, because, you know, and I was just talking about this with somebody earlier today. You know, they were complaining about their health insurance, and the company that, you know, I work part-time for has just terrible health insurance. It's really expensive, and it covers, you know, good luck. And he was complaining that, you know, how it costs like $1,000 a month for him and his family, and that there's a high deductible, and it's, you know, this in-network stuff, and there's, you know, co-pays and co-insurance and, you know, all this stuff. And I said, well, I'll be honest, when I was a union worker, we had the best healthcare you could possibly get. And the union, you know, funded it. You know, we funded it through our contributions, of course, but it was not as expensive as what you're paying, and it was much better. And he immediately shut down. We don't need a union here. They just get in the middle of things. I'm going, yeah, they get in the middle of things and make sure that you don't get your wages stolen, and they make sure that you get decent health care, and that you have something of a pension. And oh, by the way, the hours that you wait, you get compensated for. I don't see a downside, other than a generation has been trained to think we don't need that. Really, really twisted. But again, you know, I'm looking at this study and not surprised one little bit that wage theft is this bad. I would argue this is just a handful. This is just the little tip of it. It is much, much, much worse. I'd love to hear your stories. Have you ever had your wages stolen? Have you ever had a situation where the boss said, you know what? Work through your lunch. I'll pick you up next week. And they never do. And even if they do, it's still wage theft. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. right back after this. The much anticipated, the much loved, our favorite person from the Show Me State, Sarah Kendzior. Quick break. Right back with Sarah. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1998. That was the day GM workers in Flint, Michigan walked off the job. 9,200 workers with UAW locals 659 and 651 had shut down a company which at the time accounted for 1% of the country's economic output. Production at GM plants throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all came to a screeching halt. Many noted that what began as a localized walkout became the most significant strike against GM since 1970. Management had moved dies out of the metal center and shipped them to operations in Canada. In an act of international solidarity, brothers and sisters in the CAW refused to handle the dies. The 7-week strike was solid against a Wall Street attack on one of the last closed shops in the country. The strike was also popular with auto workers elsewhere, who confronted assembly line speed up, mandatory overtime, and the constant fear of plant closures. It inspired GM workers in Indiana, Ohio, and California to also go on strike. Even workers at the Tennessee-based Saturn plant, touted as a model of labor management relations, voted to strike in response to threatened outsourcing. But the strike essentially ended in a standoff. The union had stopped GM from closing plants in Flint and Dayton, Ohio, at least for a while, and GM agreed to invest millions in modernizing the Flint facilities. But weeks after the strike ended, GM bosses avowed more union-busting attacks. They declared a two-pronged strategy. First, they intended to spin off the Delphi Parts Division as an independent operation. Then, GM announced they planned to close existing U.S. plants in favor of new facilities that assembled pre-made parts fabricated at non-union suppliers. The war against the UAW had begun. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Somebody's watching you, again. Somebody's watching you,
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So you knew this had to happen today. You had to know that during Trump's I don't even know what to call it. It was an NFL celebration without the players. It was a celebration of the championship Philadelphia Eagles without the Eagles being there. Because evidently they kneeled, and evidently they weren't patriotic Americans. So punishment for them. We've uninvited you. There. Turns out two guys actually kneeled during the playing of the national anthem at today's thing. And the first thing I thought when I saw it is off to Guantanamo with them. That's the future of things in our country. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on maybe that and maybe Trump should have shot Comey. Who knows? I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come share some of her thoughts. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, what do you think? A couple of guys knelt during the national anthem today. Off to Guantanamo with them?
Oh, I think that's wishful thinking, but on Trump's part. But yeah, I haven't found out too much about who those guys are. But Trump, he likes to just basically take advantage of these situations, sort of cultural things, sports things, these matters of spectacle in order to try to flaunt power. But I think in this case, it just really backfired.
It was really kind of sad. I mean, and pathetic. The fact that he comes out yesterday and the wording of, did you read the wording of his uninvite?
No, I didn't see it.
It was really just kind of, like a 2-year-old having a tantrum. Says, well, since you're not going to do it, we're going to take this away. And I'm going, I don't know that they really wanted to come to begin with.
Yeah. So standard procedure, I would think. I mean, and that's the thing is, it's at this point, it's getting repetitive. It's getting old, and I think that kind of the shock value of the way that he's treated, dissenting athletes, dissenting entertainers, and so forth has kind of diminished, which is why, there wasn't the kind of outcry you saw last year with the NFL. And that's bad in one sense, because it's a sign of normalization. But on the other hand, I think we have very severe problems in terms of abuse of executive power, in terms of how, immigrants and people seeking asylum are being treated. So, it's good in a way if this doesn't dominate the conversation. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that makes you go, not surprised at all, but it is where we are. But the thing is, I was just reading a New York Times article this morning that it said that Trump and his lawyers have embraced this vision of vast executive power, and I'm going, now you're reporting on that?
Embrace the vision too. Not Trump is emulating the tactics of a dictator and actually has the capacity in executive office to enact them because he doesn't have any pushback from the levers of Congress that our founding fathers devised to, prevent this exact situation from happening, but has embraced a new vision of executive power. I mean, it's just amazing. I saw another headline, that framed it in a similar way. Like, he had some grand new idea. Like, he's literally announcing his autocracy in advance, and he's been doing it the entire time. Like, every time he ran for president in the past, he did this. Throughout his presidential campaign in 2015, 2016, he did this. He basically was, ticking off, if there's like a checklist of signs of impending dictatorship, he was doing it. And then when he gets in office, he enacts them. And so now we're down to kind of the final straw, which is, do we have a president or do we have a king? And he's basically coming out and saying, yes, actually, you're going to have a king. You're not going to have any kind of accountability. You're not going to have any sway over the decisions I make. I'm going to define the law. I am synonymous with the law. This is the sort of stuff like Daniel Webster wrote screeds about in the 1830s when Andrew Jackson was in power. I mean, it's tyrannical. And the New York Times, because they're his court stenographers, of course, just see it as, an interesting and quaint new vision we've got going on. So, yeah, screw that.
Yeah, I'm with you. But here's the thing. I mean, they're the failing New York Times. I mean, you would think, after being beat up and humiliated that, they would stop this already. Or is this some kind of media version of...
Or is this some fake feud?
Yeah, but is this some kind of media version of Stockholm Syndrome or something?
There's a little bit of that going on. There is some denial. I think that people, some in the press don't want to admit how bad this is, how serious this is, because when this leads to its end conclusion, you end up with no free press. And so all these people who think that they're, jumping on the Trump train, which happens to be for them a gravy train, in the end are just going to find themselves out of a job, unable to speak freely, et cetera, if this is all followed to its natural conclusion. But, I wouldn't apply this to the media in general, but the Times, feuds, this whole failing New York Times stuff is absolute nonsense. Like, I think there are some people at the Times who are doing good work, who've been consistently doing good work. And then there are some who have been consistently doing little but enabling Trump and his administration to get away with corruption by creating this kind of spectacle, by creating this court intrigue. And, Trump, when he tweets about someone, occasionally you see real flashes of anger. I think this is particularly true when he's targeting somebody in a racist way. I think that those tweets of anger are sincere. Other times, he basically targets people who he would like you to read. And the reason he targets them is to give this kind of sense of objectivity. Like, if I'm attacking them, then what they say must be true. And so if, the New York Times comes out and says, either in an op-ed that Trump is not so bad, or they have some sort of article about internal disputes in the administration that imply that power is not being consolidated, that's beneficial for him. And there are people listening probably now thinking, Trump's not smart enough to do that. Trump's a moron. He's incapable of it. This isn't chess. And it's like, fine, it's not chess. It's charades. And Trump has been playing it extremely well for 40 years. He has the New York press, by I'm trying to think of another word.
The short hairs. We'll go with short hairs.
Yes, by the short hairs. And he always has. You can go back and look at how he treated, especially the tabloid press, but also the Times. in the 80s, in the 90s, planting stories, pretending to be his own publicist, and controlling them. He has all this gossip on them. He has all this blackmail on them. And given that there's, sexual predators like Glenn Thrush working at some of these organizations, I would think that would give some extra leverage for the Trump team. And so that's just a bad situation. And I'm not surprised that they would kind of paint what's an extremely illegal abuse of power in a semi-favorable light.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying it all during the campaign that, don't discount this guy. He was somebody who for, decades dominated the New York media market, and that's not easy to do.
Yeah, and I think if the New York media market did not dominate the national media market, we might not have this problem. And there's a strange paradox, because I actually think people from New York, like everyday citizens of New York, are among the best informed people in the country on Trump. They're particularly people, over the age of 40 who grew up with the New York press back when it would actually report on all of Trump's bankruptcies, corruption, scandals, etc. They learned all this stuff. They knew he was a con artist. They knew he was full of it, and they didn't back him. But the media is not the same as the people, and they're very much in his pocket. I think some of it is for financial reasons. I think some of it's out of fear, and I think some of it is out of, an ideological kind of matchup on certain issues, particularly related to race. And, that's a little bit frightening. And again, this is not true of everyone in the Times. I think in particular, they've had very good reporting on the environment and on Pruitt and environmental issues and all this other stuff. But it's concerning. They have too much influence, and people are always asking me, like, what should I read? And I really think just dismiss institutions out of hand. Like, look at the individual reporters at these places. Like, are they doing good work? Are they reliable? Are they honest? Does it stand up over time? Do they seem to have an agenda? Don't worry about which paper it is, although, I mean, there's some places like Fox News where, quite honestly, like, you're not going to find an objective party except for maybe Shepard Smith or something. But, but for everybody else, just kind of look at the individual articles, individual reporters, and don't think, oh, it's the New York Times, it's so prestigious, it must be good, because that's really just not the case anymore.
No, and they should also read your New York Times best-selling book, View From Flyover Country.
Yeah, they have an excellent bestseller list. I highly recommend that. But yeah, everything else, though, just, line your birdcage or whatever.
But here's the thing. I mean, I look at, as you've said, they're moving in this and at light speed in this kind of, taking over in this, autocratic fashion, and there's no one to stop them. And I look at, today the report came out that evidently some reporters asked Ted Cruz about if Trump can pardon himself, and it took him exactly 18 seconds to say nothing. And then he claims later that, well, I just ignored the question. And this is really a perfect example of what the Republicans who control both houses are not doing anything to help us or stop him.
Oh, yeah. No, I felt like Ted Cruz was like practicing for his confirmation hearing or something where he's going to be, potentially asked some difficult question by a Democrat and, abetting treason or corruption or something and decides to give a long pause. But yeah, I mean, it's pathetic. I mean, Ted Cruz is in particular so pathetic. He's somebody who it just blows my mind. Like, someone goes after your wife, they go after your dad, they go after you in this really personal way, they humiliate you, they say you're the Zodiac killer, and then you go and kiss their ass. Like, I'm never going to get past these men. Like, they just have no pride. Like, they have no dignity, no self-respect. They also have no loyalty to country. They have no decency. They're failing miserably at their jobs. But aside from that, I almost don't respect, I don't expect that from Republicans anymore. I don't expect any kind of good governance, but I definitely expect them to be prideful and self-serving, and they can't even do that. No, I mean, you're kind of stymied, No,
you're right on. I mean, I but again, I mean, this isn't new. I mean, I not beating out upon John McCain, but I remember 2000, and how John McCain turned around and supported Bush is well beyond me after the South Carolina push poll.
Yes, after they went after his kid. Yep. I don't get it. It's like some things are just not forgivable. You can have a debate and exchange some nasty words, whatever. You go after somebody's family, it's like, I mean, I don't want to give Trump credit for anything, but he sort of seems to understand that. Like, it's probably an extension of his mafia mindset, you don't go after family, but, seriously, like, people should kind of maybe learn a thing or two from that. I don't know. Yeah. It's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing for all of them.
Except for Ted Cruz and the ugly wife or whatever the argument was there. But here's the thing, and this is what bothers me. You're right. There seems to be no courage in that party to hold. I know they talk about country. They love to wrap themselves in the flag. They love to take the photo ops with all of the soldiers and all that. But it appears they would sell all of that under the, for a nickel and a way out the door.
Yeah, I mean, they're completely spineless. That's why. This is a side of how upside down everything is. We had the pleasant surprise in Missouri of the Republican Party actually growing a spine and standing up against Greitens, who is this sort of like mini Trump in training, and saying, no, we're not going to stand for it. And they're continuing to invest his corruption. And so that's been interesting to watch because my whole, for the whole history of Missouri's been kind of ahead of the curve, whether it's in terms of American prosperity or America's decline. And so if the direction we're going is, we're finally going to, clamp down on our tyrants, then I would hope that maybe we are the bellwether state again, and that'll extend to the nation. But it's also novel. I was like, wow, someone's actually being held accountable, not completely, and Republicans are actually doing the right thing, and there's actually a bipartisan consensus. Now, imagine if we had this on a national level. Gee, wouldn't that be nice? But I don't really see it coming.
But Sarah, I mean, what this guy was accused of was pretty despicable. I mean, this is one of those things that, at the bottom of the barrel. I don't know how anyone rational, sane, I don't know how you defend that or defend inaction. Although, I got to be honest, we've got a state representative here in Pennsylvania who evidently threatened another state representative, a woman with a gun who was going to break up with him, threatened to kill her, and I guess, threatened another one, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. He's still in the state house, not running for re-election, but the Republicans here are cowardice as well. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, they usually these days just kind of gather around their own. And, initially when Trump first kind of appeared, that's what they were doing. They were attacking him. And then it was just this gradual, like one by one, they began to fall. And then they began to act very afraid. And, Trump has committed a lot of the same offenses that Greitens did. And I think he's committed ones that are, much, much more serious and certainly in a much greater position of power and for multiple decades. And so you would think, there's plenty of room to walk away. Like, that's what's so bizarre is it's like the Republicans were waiting for an opening, and then they would get one. They'd get the Access Hollywood video, or they would get Charlottesville, or they would get Trump threatening to nuke North Korea. And it's like, okay, guys, you can walk away now. And I think that the majority of the American public is going to understand why, and they just don't. You get 24 hours of a conscience, and then it disappears.
No, I mean, what's bothering me is, all of this stuff has now become normal. I've got people now, they're like, I don't even pay attention anymore. It's so crazy. I don't even care.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part of all of this is that we've now normalized it. Because, and I go back to Giuliani's comments. I've actually had people say, it's probably true. Trump probably could have shot Comey and he'd have gotten less slack than he's gotten here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that whole, I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and, voters would still have my back. I mean, that's accurate, but not just for voters, but for how the media treats him, how the GOP treats him, how law enforcement treats him. He knows this, and it's extremely frustrating. I mean, we're forgetting that, he had a fire in his building that due to the fact that he had no alarm, no sprinkler system, no safety precautions, a man did die on Fifth Avenue because of Donald Trump. He burned to death in his building. And this guy's father was friends with Trump. He hung out with him in Mar-a-Lago. There are all these pictures. And Trump never expressed condolences, never took responsibility. I mean, if this was any other president, this would be in the paper. I mean, first of all, the fact that Trump hasn't divested from his business interests and still has this tower would have been a problem. But then someone goes and dies in it, and that's not an issue. And, we spent all of the last few weeks kind of wondering what the hell was happening with Melania. And I kept thinking, what will happen if she emerges and it's clear, she was beaten? Or, what if she died. And I want to be very clear that this is not anything I wish for in either circumstance. Like, I want her to be well, no matter what anyone feels about someone. They don't deserve to be beaten. They certainly should not be murdered. So this is not some sort of, I hope this happens or fantasy in that sense. But I kept thinking, how would the press cover it? Like, if they knew, would they tell us? Or would it just be like, oh, well, we don't really need first ladies, or she didn't play a big role anyway, or, maybe she wasn't that. I mean, like, I kept thinking they're going to rationalize it, they're going to deny it, and that started to freak me out, was just imagining that potential press reaction devoid of any commitment to reality, devoid of any compassion, devoid of any desire to inform. And, I don't know quite what her status is now. I mean, I guess she's out there allegedly.
Yes,
and
she's
okay,
somewhere. But it would be like I think they would just bring in a replacement, and we would, I guess there was a TV show back in the '60s, Bewitched, where they brought in a whole new husband, and it was the same guy. It was a different guy, same role.
Becky's on Roseanne,
Yeah, I mean,
it was too rich.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's the thing, and I feel like half a good chunk of the media, especially Fox News, would just lie. They would just be like, oh yeah, that's Melania, and we'd all be like, no, it's not. It's a totally different person. And they'd be like, no, what are you talking about? And it would just be this like epic gaslighting. It would be like the biggest gaslighting of all time, and it's the kind of thing that happens in dictatorships constantly. Like, it kept bringing me back to when Uzbekistan's president died, and he died like 4 days before they officially announced it, but everyone knew he died because they were getting ready for the funeral and doing all this stuff. They kept saying he was alive, and people were sending him greetings and well wishes on the Independence Day, and it was just the most surreal thing to see play out. And the whole time this was going on, I was like, God, that could happen here. Like, we're actually at that point where our climate, our political climate, our media climate has deteriorated to such a level that I can actually envision that happening here. That's, that freaks me out.
No, it's really crazy. But again, I would not be surprised by it at all. But the questions then become, how do we hold them accountable? A lot of people have a lot of faith in this Mueller investigation, which I got to be honest, I'm not so certain. I'm a little leery. I'm a little afraid maybe that this is kind of a big maybe he can pardon himself. Who knows?
Yeah.
But, you look at this and you start asking a bunch of questions because, look, I don't think the founders really ever envisioned a narcissistic leader like this who wanted to consolidate party power and a party that would allow it to happen. I don't think they ever really dreamt that as a possibility, but here we are.
Yeah, they didn't envision that it would not be checked. I mean, they certainly anticipated a tyrant because that's what they were reacting to. They didn't envision this kind of obsequiousness. I also don't think they envisioned the kind of international system which has its own sort of, sets of checks and balances that are like a counteract to the ones that we have here, where, the Trump administration is propped up by so many hostile actors overseas. There's so much, manipulation of our political system from outside, and from bad people within. I think this whole thing of Trump saying he can't pardon himself, that he can pardon himself, is just something he's going to repeat over and over and over again until the shock value wears off and until it starts to sound true or even reasonable to parts of the population. And I certainly think he's going to go for it. He's going to try. And people really need to step up and not just say, no, you can't do that, because they've been saying that all along. They said that about, you need to divest, you need to release your tax returns, you need to stop assaulting women, and you need to confess to that. You need to be honest about your relationship with Russia. And he just ignores that. I mean, he doesn't care. And so people need to take greater action. And I think the kind of action he responds to is indictments. And so I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with the Mueller probe, with Manafort. I think Trump's tweets and his pardons have been a clearer sign that he's willing to pardon anybody involved in this investigation, so long as they stay loyal to him, so long as they don't rat him out as an individual. And I think that, his circle understands that, and they'll find that attractive, and that might be a really horrifying situation. As I've been saying all along, I don't think that they moved fast enough. I think they needed to stop this before he got in, because once you get in, it's very hard to get them out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the scary thing. Any thoughts on the Mueller team wanting to revoke the bail of Manafort, because evidently they claim he's a witness, but allegedly tampering with witnesses?
Oh, I mean, I totally believe he's tampering with witnesses because he can't stop. He's like a crime machine. Like, of course he's going to commit crime. And this is like, I think I had a conversation with you about this because they had Manafort and Gates and they were going to like just let them out and roam around. I think they're going to let Gates go on a spring trip to Boston and announce it. And I'm like, one, someone might kill you. Two, you're a flight risk. And that's true of Manafort. And there are always these very lax conditions applied to somebody who, you know, has been involved in international crime for multiple decades in terms of Manafort that I thought were really inappropriate. And to be clear, you know, judges decide the terms in a lot of these cases. It's not just Mueller. But I'm like, dude, you know, you need to keep Manafort locked up because he's going to mess with the case. He's possibly going to try to kill people. Like, you got to watch him. And so, you know, at least he was watched, and of course he went and did something like this. You know, he's intimidating or, you know, trying to tamper with witnesses. You know, this is the guy who got caught trying to change a Word document into a PDF with compromising information in it. So in many ways, you know, on one hand you could be like, okay, he's not the brightest bulb. I don't think that's really true. I actually think he's very smart, but I think that he's been acting with such impunity for such a long time. He's been just breaking laws left and right all over the world, assuming he'll get out of it, that he just doesn't kind of care. And so I am curious if they actually do put him behind bars. Maybe that will finally have some sort of effect on him in terms of, you know, cooperation, in terms of, you know, his behavior. I mean, I don't know. I'm inclined to think he won't flip. I'm inclined to think he's a kind of omerta guy who, you know, like just will stick to the code, but also is probably really terrified of the outside world and all these different international players who would like to kill him. So, you know, I don't think he'll cooperate, but I still would be really happy if he's behind bars.
Oh, and where he should be, because if it were you or me or heaven forbid a black guy, behind bars without question.
Yeah, I read about some teenager today who like stole a pair of sneakers and got 5 years in prison. And I'm just thinking about Manafort on house arrest with his multiple homes and his boats and all this stuff. And I'm just like, this country, man. Like, I don't know. It's just so disgusting.
Well, it's like the poor black guy in Philadelphia. He a homeless guy stole 3 peppermint patties, spent 555 days waiting for in jail, waiting for a mental health treatment center to open up.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's vile. It's absolutely vile.
Just vile. Before I let you go, I have to get your thoughts on the whole Samantha Bee, Roseanne racist tweet thing. Any thoughts?
I mean,
distraction?
I don't know. I'm so sick of hearing about Roseanne. It's like when ABC hired Roseanne, obviously this was going to happen because Roseanne's Twitter account has been like this for several years. And, you know, I watched the show. I actually didn't think the show was bad, but this was like a train wreck waiting to happen. And so my guess is they wanted to cancel it for some other reason, like probably Roseanne being a giant pain in the ass to work with. And this gave them, you know, a reason. And then, you know, what we're seeing now is this kind of like backlash where you see the conservatives being like, they got Roseanne. We have to get one of theirs. And so they're going after Samantha Bee or they're going after Joy Reid. And it's like very obvious and very deliberate and very ludicrous. And, you know, I don't know. I'm mostly like ignoring it because I just think there's bigger problems at hand. But it is indicative of like a really silly mentality, like a real, you know, team-based partisan mentality. I don't think most of the country shares it. I think most people are kind of like, you know, wow, we are having a trade war with Canada and I just lost my job, and, you know, thinking about things like that. But the media does love it. So
yeah, trade war with Canada was not what we were told during the election. Now, look, I'm not against the idea of a trade war with China. I think at some point you've got to stop, you know, just getting, you know, decimated by their mercantilist policies and how they've been just stealing industry after industry. But with Canada, really?
Yeah, who goes after Canada? Like, what kind of nut job, you know, targets Canada? Like, now we know. But, you know, it's really bad. Like, my state's affected by this. My state's affected by all these trade wars. And, you know, I think that people, like, they keep saying, out there, they won't even know who's responsible. I mean, people know. People know who's responsible for this. And I'm embarrassed as an American because, you know, Canada's our friend, and Canada does not deserve this. And I felt weird watching that video with Trudeau, where he was like, American people, you are not the enemy or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is the kind of thing that the U.S. used to send, to countries that were living under totalitarian regimes, and now we get them. So that's, I guess, just where we are.
Oh, when I saw that, I thought John Bolton was probably in the Oval Office going, we need to bomb them right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no limit. I mean, Trump has talked about that. He's talked about, for years, dropping nukes on our allies. He wanted to nuke France. Like, you can find a 1987 interview he did where he thought they just kind of deserted. He also wanted to nuke Pakistan. And so there's not a lot of logic. Like, he's very isolationist. He sees everybody as his enemy. It doesn't matter if they're our long-term friend or ally. I think that actually makes it more tempting for him. He's like, ooh, how far can we push this country before they just say, screw it? Like, that's his psychology. But in terms of his relationship with Russia, like, that's a very advantageous thing for Russia to have. And if they were, for example, looking to groom an asset, that would be a quality that would really stand out to them, where they would say, if this guy was president, he'd intentionally isolate the United States from all of their allies. And we can probably manipulate him into doing so with money or ego or other methods. So, I don't think it's coincidence that this benefits Putin in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're right. Sarah, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Always great talking with you. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Good stuff. Our good friend Sarah Kendzior. I most certainly check out her book, New York Times bestseller, The View From Flyover Country. We'll get a link out of how you can pick that up. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day that Secretary of State George Marshall delivered a speech at Harvard University. In his speech, Marshall made a call for the United States to send assistance to European countries devastated by World War II. He declared, quote, "The truth of the matter is that Europe's requirements for the next 3 or 4 years of foreign food and other essential products, principally from America, are so much greater than her present ability to pay that she must have substantial additional help or face economic, social, and political deterioration of a very grave character." His speech became the basis for the European Recovery Program, or what became known as the Marshall Plan. The goal of the plan was to boost the morale of the Europeans, while strengthening trade ties between the U.S. and Europe. There was great fear among leaders in the United States that economic instability would cause European countries to turn towards communism. Through the Marshall Plan, the United States sent aid in the form of grants, loans, and technical assistance. Much of the money went to purchase food and manufactured goods produced in the United States and sent to Europe. This demand helped to keep the American economy booming. In all, more than $13 billion in aid was sent to 16 European countries. Some European labor unions objected to American intervention in Europe as part of the plan. This caused contention between different European labor organizations. As some unions affiliated more closely with the communists, others aligned themselves with the West. The Cold War had taken its toll on labor solidarity. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
I really like her. I think she's fantastic. I think she's bright, brilliant, and funny as hell. Honestly, one of those guests that you could have on all day. and I almost did. It was one of those things where I was trying to break 10 minutes ago, and I was like, no, I'm just going to keep going because, she's spot on. I mean, and I was saying that, the distraction, is what it is. But what this administration is doing, scary, scary stuff. Now, not surprising, a new report put out today by the Social Security and Medicare group. This is one of those things that the Republicans have been doing for a very long time. And it's all in this idea that we can destroy it. If you starve it long enough, if you harm it enough, if you go after and defund it enough, and you continue down this path of defund and destroy and squeeze and cut and constantly throw the message that something's failing. The Social Security is failing. Medicare is failing. And this is from the 2018 annual report of the boards of trustees of the Federal Hospital Insurance and Federal Supplementary Medical and Insurance Trust Fund. It's basically saying that Medicare is in big trouble. And as the AP tweeted out and reported today, that by 2026, they're saying that Medicare will be insolvent. And they're saying that it's going to be, insolvent 3 years sooner than what had been projected. And, oh, by the way, it was those huge tax cuts. It was the Republican policies that have caused that 3-year coming back. Now, once you got into it a little bit, and I read, Dean Baker's piece, who's one of my favorite economists, he points out that their reporting on it is terribly inaccurate. What evidently the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund has said is that the Medicare Part A will be depleted in 2026, but it would still be able to pay out 90% of the scheduled benefits. And as he points out, this is nothing like being insolvent. Insolvent means it's broke. There's nothing. And this is one of those things that the Republicans have done masterfully, is they've got younger people, people a little bit younger than me going, I'll see a UFO before I see a Social Security check. And you find out that, Social Security has a shortfall, and it's about 20 years out, and it's something that needs to be addressed, but it doesn't mean in 20 years it goes broke. It means that benefits will probably have to be cut. I think the number I saw was 78%, on into the future. So 100% of the benefits for that, I guess it's in the next 15 or 20 years. And then after that, it's like 78% forever. And if we do nothing to change it, that's the reality. And the Republicans have done a great job of doing nothing, because they're really good at that, because they want to cause this crisis. They want us to think, oh my gosh, it's failing. Oh my gosh, it's not going to be there. We need to make draconian cuts now. And you've got Trump tweeting out today that they want to claw back $15 billion in spending. And you know where that $15 billion is coming from. This is my problem with all this. They are masters at setting up this system of going, uh-oh, crisis. Here's the solution. All we have to do is take food out of the mouths of children, kick those poor people while they're down, and those disabled, screw them. We can move that money over to here and give more tax cuts. And I don't know how it is that we don't revolt against those ideas. I mean, it's right there. And the thing is they're not even lying about it. They're coming out with their alternative facts, which is the system is broken. Socialism is bad. And, I often have this conversation with people who say, well, you know what we need to do? We need to privatize Social Security. Give me my money. I'll put it in my account. And I often love to entertain the idea of, okay, let's do that. Let's do exactly what you want. Let's have everybody have their own little tiny account. that their Social Security money goes into, and then it's feed to death, and it's because you're going to have sales tax fees for the financial people, and then yearly fees and quarterly fees and transfer fees, and look, they'll figure out some fees, which, as we know in the 401k world, is just devastating to people's retirements. And I say, okay, so let's say we follow the path that we followed by allowing the Republicans to steal our defined benefit pension plans, because it's what they did. They promised us this, this nirvana of we're all going to be millionaires. We're going to all be millionaires. And I remember the day. It was October 1993. I had gotten hired on with a new company, and they said, this is, because I had moved from Ohio to Pennsylvania. I started a new job, and they said, this is our retirement plan. I had come from Ohio, where it was strictly a defined pension plan, and you got X amount of dollars after so many years for the rest of your life, and that was what it was. And they said, well, we've got this hybrid plan. We've got this RIP plan. And in 30 years, if you stay here 30 years and you work, and you're going to be a millionaire. You're going to leave a millionaire. And I remember it like it was just happened. I told the guy, I said, there's no way that the powers to be are going to allow a dumb truck driver to have $1 million in retirement fund. It's never going to happen. They are going to steal as much as they can. Now, I only made it there 18 years. I didn't get to the 30. I stayed 18. And after 18 years, I had a little over 120,000. And you go, well, that's a good chunk of change. It's not bad. That's more than halfway to 30. And I understand compounding, and every 7 years it doubles. And that's the theory. And I go, okay, well, let's say that 100,000 doubles. It's 200,000 after 25 years. And let's just say those last 5 are amazing. I have 400,000 at the end of the time. That's not $1 million. And even had I continued to put that other money in, it's still not, because, 2008 happened. And that money went from, 100,000 down to 60. Because half of everything was gone, just about. And, I look at this and I sit and I go, okay, what they're feeding us is the same poison that they fed us back in the 80s. It's the same bad idea. It's only taking something that was, understand, not a pension plan. Social Security was never meant as a sole pension plan, even though most of us use it that way. It was meant as anti-poverty insurance. It was to make sure that no senior was completely destitute. It was to make sure that no senior was hopeless and homeless and nowhere to go and no resources, because they understood that as you get older, you're not going to be able to work, and there's got to be a way and some means for someone to take care of themselves. Well, what the Wall Street criminals see is they see an opportunity to, hey, if we can separate all of them, if we can get the sheep all separated, we can separate the flock. We can pick one at a time and rob them blind, which is what they've been doing with Granny's retirement for decades. And I look at this and I keep coming back to the sad reality is that we've allowed the Republicans to really, in the most, to me, it's criminal. I mean, it rises to criminal what they've done. I stop and I think about what my grandparents' generation built. My grandparents were homeless when they got married. My grandmother's father didn't like my grandfather, so threw my grandmother out, and my grandfather didn't have anywhere to go when he came back from the army, and they lived in their car for a while. And in their lifetime, they went from homeless to leading a solid middle-class life, to spending their golden years, their retirement years, secure in their home that they paid for, with a defined benefit pension that both my grandmother and grandfather each worked for through their respective unions, had a little bit of savings set aside, and then there was that Social Security. They were the embodiment of the three-legged stool. Now, they didn't live, the Donald Trump Mar-a-Lago existence, but they didn't want, they didn't go hungry. They didn't worry about, am I going to lose my home or am I going to be in the street or any of that. And for me, that's what we should all be striving for, to make sure that at the end of a lifetime of work, we have dignity, we have respect, we have security. And sadly, what these criminals are doing is they're destroying that so that they can have short-term gain now for them. Hooray for me, and basically screw you. And that is one of my biggest problems of what's going on. And I hope we wake up to the reality very, very soon. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you had those situations pop up? What's in your 401k? I'd love to hear it. Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that leaders from the retail clerks and the amalgamated meat cutters unions began two-day special conventions to discuss merging their organizations. The result was the forming of the United Food and Commercial Workers. The retail clerks could trace their history all the way back to 1888. They had a strong tradition of effectively using boycotts as a tool to improve wages, hours, and working conditions for their members. The meat cutters also had a long storied history, reaching all the way back to 1897. The union had weathered a series of hard-fought strikes in Chicago stockyards. With their nearly century-long history of organizing workers, it was not surprising that the new UFCW quickly became a force to be reckoned with in the U.S. labor movement. Since its founding, several other unions have merged under the UFCW umbrella. In 2003, UFCW began a strike over health care benefits for grocery store workers in Southern California. Nearly 80,000 workers at 900 stores were part of the strike and lockout. The strike lasted nearly half a year. Grocery store owners were determined to reduce worker benefits. One of their motivations was to compete with chains like Walmart, whose anti-union positions provide few benefits or protections for their workers. The strike ended in a compromise settlement. It became clear in 2003, with companies such as Walmart pushing out smaller grocery chains, that grocery retail workers are at the front lines of today's labor struggles. Today, UFCW represents more than 1.3 million workers in the U.S., mostly in the grocery, retail store, and food processing industry. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets align, ain't no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it is primary day across 8 states, and in one of those states, Alabama, who had the historic victory by Democrat Doug Jones. One of those elections that nobody, including me, thought a Democrat had a snowball's chance in actually winning. But I got to tell you, the more you see the organizing going on, the more you see people talking to each other, engaging, educating, activating, the more I have some hope for a South that, well, turns somewhat sane. And that's why I've asked Anthony Daniels to come talk with us. He's the Alabama House Minority Leader. Leader Daniels, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick, for having me.
So, like I said, it's primary day. How are things looking in your neck of the woods?
Things are looking great. I think that, right now in Alabama, we're beginning to see some very inspiring groundswell enthusiasm among different parts of the state that we have not seen in a long time. And so we're very excited about that and very hopeful.
I would hope so. I mean, after the Doug Jones win, and some of the work that he's doing, and that once you taste victory, there's part of me that goes, you start to fight for more of it.
Absolutely, and after the Doug Jones race, which was a phenomenal race, we saw an increase in interest of individuals wanting to run for office. And so now this year, we have 75 districts challenging 75 districts, whereas in 2014 we were only challenging 56, and those are just House districts. And we're having stronger candidates that are running from the municipal all the way up to the statewide. And so, it's very exciting. And we have primaries now. That was something that, that really exciting to me, because individual voters have an opportunity to really choose their representatives.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania, and, there were so many seats in the last election that ran unopposed. And I'm going, it's insane to me that any office goes unopposed. But, this year, none. And, across this country, the hope is that, maybe we see a Democratic resurgence, much like the Newt Gingrich era got, people to run for every office. The hope is from this point forward, you start seeing Democrats doing that. And maybe you start clawing back some of those, 1,000 elected seats we've lost over the last several years.
Absolutely. One of the things that I noticed in previous election cycles where we did not have a lot of candidates on the ballot, it gave the other side an opportunity to really invest their resources in a few races. For example, Democrats only challenged 56 seats in 2014, which left about 49 seats available unchallenged. And so what ends up happening is the other side, they end up pooling their resources and zeroing in on the 2 to 3 races instead of spreading their resources out. And so we got to force them to spread their resources out, because there's not a whole lot of resources going around.
Yep.
Based upon their voting records and the things that they talked about accomplishing, but they've fallen short of. And so it gives us an opportunity to really play the game differently, play better offense, and as we move forward.
No, I'm hoping that. And the other part of not just using their resources, but also defending their insane policies. I mean, I've talked to people from Virginia in the historic wins that they had there. And, what their comments were is, we went out and talked to Republican voters. We went out and talked to Democratic voters. We went out and we talked to independent voters. We talked to them on issues that mattered to them and their families. And we ran on our core values. And I think this is one of those things that the Democratic Party really needs to get back to, the whole, in every pot, there's going to be a chicken, something.
Absolutely. No flyover country. Talk to every voter, work hard, and you may find some areas of common ground, and just talk about those issues and run on those particular issues, because for the most part, most families want to do well, want to see their children do well, and want to see the citizens around them do well. It's just that we've been talking about what we're for and the issues that we feel are important, instead of talking to the voters and finding out what's important to them. And so that's retail politics is what I believe in doing as you run a race.
No, you're absolutely right. But one of the things a friend of mine had pointed out, and it was one of those observations that was hard to hear. This was about 3 years ago. He goes, the problem with Democrats is they run for president. They don't run for school board. They don't run for dog catcher. They don't run for local tax assessor. They've allowed the Republicans to organize at the local level and take over all of the positions in your local government. And where I'm at, sadly, that's the reality. Not sure how it is in your neck of the woods, but where I'm at, that observation held water.
Absolutely. That's exactly what's happening. And what's the other thing to that is, by Democrats conceding these local offices, it cuts off our ability to really be able to develop a pipeline for the legislative and state house and Senate races. And so we've handicapped ourselves by not really having that pipeline to run from a nonpartisan race or a local municipal race, where you would have name ID, which will help you and build relationships over time as an elected official at the local level, which will help you as you think to look to move up and run for a higher office. And so we've neglected that.
Yeah, we haven't built that bench, have we?
Not at all. And with gerrymandering, we've allowed the other side to draw the district, and so we have to figure out a strategy. And right now, I know that even in where you are in Pennsylvania, there have been lawsuits filed, and we filed one here in Alabama in order to really get fair districts drawn. And so it's a shame that we have to do this through the courts, but we've done it to ourselves by really going to sleep, sleeping at the wheel, leading up to in the 2010 elections. And now we're heading into, in a couple of years, 2020. Right now in Alabama, because we're on 4-year cycles, we have to put all of our eggs in one basket right now, because you don't get a do-over in 2022, because if they're the majority party, they redraw the lines and we're back where we started.
Yeah, and this is another one of those situations, Anthony, where I'm sorry, I think it's flat out dead wrong that elected leaders are the ones who are drawing the maps. It's always been insane to me that they get to pick the voters instead of us getting to choose them. And there's got to be a way to move away from that kind of rigged system.
Absolutely, I agree. One of the things that I think we have to really think about moving forward is, especially in states like Alabama, and most of the South probably have the same rules, we have to focus on really focusing on more of an independent redistricting commission, a truly independent redistricting commission, not where politicians appoint the appointee, appoint the members of the commission, but it is something that's done by a very a nonpartisan body. It could be the state bar, individuals that are ethical, mixed with other individuals that want to do the right thing and follow the rule of law.
And looking at the primaries today, I mean, you're setting up, obviously, the election for November. Any chance we flip some of these Republican-held seats? I mean, there are a bunch of representatives that you guys have got down there that I would love to see go. People like Mo Brooks or Martha Roby. I'd love to see them out the door. Mike Rogers, I'd like to see them down, back to the private sector. Good luck on you. Thanks for your time. You've done enough damage. There's the door kind of thing. Any chance we flip some of those?
I see an opportunity for at least opportunities in two of those seats. I think that we have a really good shot at winning because the candidates are local, homegrown candidates where people know them, and so I do see an opportunity in a couple of those congressional seats. I'm not certain that Martha Roby is going to make it out of the primary. I think there'll probably likely be a runoff between her and former Congressman Bobby Bright, and so it could be a very tough road ahead for Representative Roby.
Yeah, she's one of those ones I'd like to see out, and just I don't even know why. It's kind of like a visceral thing with me, but I'd like to see her, along with Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Just angry. I don't know. There's a bunch of them. Mo Brooks, I'd love to see gone as well. Steve King, Peter King. There's a bunch, but we could go down the list all day. So let me ask you this. I mean, because, I look at the energy that we saw in the Jones campaign, and I saw the energy of, voters wanting, in many cases for the first time to get out and vote. How do we take that energy and expand to places that maybe haven't had that before? What lessons did you learn? What advice do you give other people in other places?
Well, for me, in Alabama, we have a registration issue too, and there are 500,000 unregistered Alabamians, and so I think that first we have to start really building capacity and focusing on voter registration and civic engagement. I think oftentimes we run on issues that polling data tell us to run on, but we never really micro-target our issues by the district. And so that's why the beautiful part about candidates running in the different districts around the state is that they could go on a listening tour to find out what the issues are and start micro-targeting the voters. And so I think that's something that we have to really look at doing around the state and also around the country, but also understanding that nothing is a one-size-fits-all approach. You have from polling data that I've seen in more suburban areas where there are more higher educated voters in pockets in suburban areas, their top two issues, one is education, the other one is corruption. But in rural Alabama, it's among corruption.
Food and healthcare, probably.
Yeah. And so what happens is when you're using the one-size-fits-all approach, you're not really moving that voter. For example, if Wilcox County still has, which they do today, have a double-digit unemployment rate, if you knock on Joe's door and Joe is making $22,000 a year with a family of four, to move Joe from his couch to the voting booth, you're going to have to talk about good-paying jobs. Bringing good-paying jobs to the area, focusing on education for his children. And so those are issues that move Joe from his couch to the voting booth. It's not increasing teacher salaries, which I agree that needs to be done, or issues that deal, with environmental issues. That's not a priority to Joe. And so I think some of the things that we ended up doing is I think that we're not preparing we're not typically engaging the voters at their level and where the issues that they're concerned about. We continue to use these issues that may impact California or New York or places like that, and we use this create this national narrative and really not micro targeting the messaging to the different individuals that you're talking to. So that's what I see as the path forward in the way you take back some of these seats, even in gerrymandered districts.
Yeah, I spoke with a woman from Virginia who, echoed the same things. She said we got on the ground and we talked to people about what was important to them, and we ran on how we were going to make their lives better. And that, to me, that's got to be the core tenet of whatever you guys do. I mean, the Republicans, they run on, we're going to give tax cuts to the very wealthy and big business, and obviously the money comes flowing in for them. And as I always say, the wealthy have all the money. We've out-procreated them. We got to get out and vote.
Absolutely.
Got to vote. But here, last question I've got for you, because, Alabama's a state that has kind of a lopsided voter registration, as I understand. How are you going to get those 500,000 people to come along and be and join up with you? How do you do that without the resources?
Well, right now we have the energy, and I think that for me, we're going to be focusing on fundraising, but we're also going to go back to the grassroots level and make certain that we get to know the voters and move the voters around the issues, understanding what issues are important to them. And so I think you can move the voters, by speaking their language and talking about the issues that impact them. But more importantly, I think that the registration piece has to be done in a nonpartisan way. I think there are a number of organizations that pride themselves on focusing on voter registration, but I think it's time for those organizations to come together and work together and develop a strategic plan on identifying what areas they're going to, focus on from now until the deadline for voter registration in Alabama, and focus and have a goals and timeline on registering those voters. Many of the voters, Rick, are restoration voters. We passed a piece of legislation a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, that restored the rights for certain crimes, right? And so we redefined moral turpitude, and so now that has given us an opportunity to go out and register those individuals that are considered ex-felons or certain crimes. And so a large percentage of those that are eligible voters now are restoration voters. And so we've not had a concerted effort to focus on that. That's something I think we have to prioritize.
Yeah, I've always been of the mindset if you paid your time to society, you did your sentence, you did everything, at the end of the road, you should have your rights restored fully. If you're a member of society, you should be fully a member of society. To me, that's simple. But again, it's another one of those roadblocks to keep poor people from the ballot box that you got to give Republicans credit. They've done a masterful job over the last couple of decades of doing. But Speaker Daniels, Leader Daniels, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing some thoughts, and best of luck to you guys in Alabama.
Well, thank you, and if anything that we can do in Alabama, and any ideas that can be shared around the country, Rick, we're certainly open to that. And thank you for having me.
Good stuff. Anytime. Love to talk to you again real soon. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Again, you look at this, and that was a historic race. I mean, it was amazing. And the hope is, come November, we see some of those more toxic Republicans sent to the curb. Just my thought. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1998. That was the day GM workers in Flint, Michigan walked off the job. 9,200 workers with UAW locals 659 and 651 had shut down a company which at the time accounted for 1% of the country's economic output. Production at GM plants throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all came to a screeching halt. Many noted that what began as a localized walkout became the most significant strike against GM since 1970. Management had moved dies out of the metal center and shipped them to operations in Canada. In an act of international solidarity, brothers and sisters in the CAW refused to handle the dies. The 7-week strike was solid against a Wall Street attack on one of the last closed shops in the country. The strike was also popular with auto workers elsewhere, who confronted assembly line speed up, mandatory overtime, and the constant fear of plant closures. It inspired GM workers in Indiana, Ohio, and California to also go on strike. Even workers at the Tennessee-based Saturn plant, touted as a model of labor management relations, voted to strike in response to threatened outsourcing. But the strike essentially ended in a standoff. The union had stopped GM from closing plants in Flint and Dayton, Ohio, at least for a while, and GM agreed to invest millions in modernizing the Flint facilities. But weeks after the strike ended, GM bosses avowed more union-busting attacks. They declared a two-pronged strategy. First, they intended to spin off the Delphi Parts Division as an independent operation. Then, GM announced they planned to close existing U.S. plants in favor of new facilities that assembled pre-made parts fabricated at non-union suppliers. The war against the UAW had begun. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. I gotta tell you, I like that guy. I think he's going to be someone you're going to hear an awful lot from. As it's been told to me, he's someone who's taken what is a Democratic Party in Alabama and turned it into a functioning party. As where before, there wasn't much there because it's Alabama, as in most of the South. And right now, as he's pointed out, there's this energy, there's this passion, hey, they won. And the thought that maybe there can be another win and another, and you begin taking back some of the insanity. Maybe a good thing. I mean, and not just in Alabama, but in Mississippi. And, we had done our civil rights tour through those states. And, we just met some of the most incredible people with some of the most incredible stories, of which you'll be able to hear next week as we take our vacation. Going to be playing the couple of shows that we did in Birmingham, which were just, you cannot miss those. There's just, it's rare that I'm speechless. It's rare that I don't have words. But in some of the interviews I did in Birmingham, it left me on the verge of almost tears and speechless. And I think of, the interview with Fate Morris, which, just, even today, I get goosebumps, and, just thinking of how tragic his story really is. So you're going to want to make sure you tune in next week for the replays of our civil rights tour. And I got to be honest, it was one of those learning experiences that we went on that, really, is transformational. And it started because my oldest daughter came home from school, and we were having that conversation. Well, what'd you learn today? How was school? All that. And, we learned about Rosa Parks. And I go, oh yeah, what'd you learn? Oh, she was tired. Yeah, she was tired. And I said, no, there's a lot more than that. So we did the whole Southern tour, and we got to meet Fred Gray, the attorney, who pushed the case and a whole bunch of civil rights cases. We got to see John Lewis, and it was just an amazing trip. So looking forward to being able to replay that. One of my favorite bits there. But here again, it comes down to one of the things that Minority Leader Daniels pointed out is that they've got this energy, and maybe the money comes after the fact. And I got to be honest, I was a little bit hopeful today when I saw the story that one of the Koch brothers was stepping down. David Koch was evidently stepping down from the company. Evidently, he's got some health problems, and I'm not somebody who wishes anyone ill. I believe in bad karma, so I'm not wishing anyone ill. But I'm happy to see that he will be stepping away from the political arm of. And maybe taking some of the money with it. I doubt it. I think they've funded that for a millennium forward. But the idea that we wake up to how bad and how corrosive the billionaire money has been to our politics. The reality that we're getting just hammered. And one of the things that is really just infuriating on so many levels is that we continue to vote for these bad candidates who continue to push their agenda. And for me, at some point, we just got to stop. Now, a couple of quick bits. There's a Fordham law professor named Zephyr Teachout. She has launched a Democratic bid for New York Attorney General. She has said that she will use the law as a sword and not just a shield. She's going to go after, and she's going to sue the Trump administration on everything that they do. Now, the sad reality is it's going to be an uphill climb for her because her opponent, this Letitia James, she's evidently the New York City public advocate. She's been endorsed by the state Democrats and Cuomo. So going to be an uphill climb for her. But, I want people who are going to look at this administration and hold them accountable. And some good news on the accountable front. Evidently, a Manhattan judge ruled today that, yes, indeed, Donald Trump is going to have to be deposed in the defamation lawsuit that was brought last year sometime by the former Apprentice contestant. So that should be fun. And I hope they put that on pay-per-view, because I think we could help solve our debt problems with that. Just kind of throwing it out there. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, is going to share some of his thoughts on the world as we know it, the events going on. What's Trump going to do in North Korea? Who's our top diplomat? Going to be in Singapore for the Hair Summit. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Lifting the restrictions on clean, very clean coal. We're going to put the miners back to work.
Trump administration moves toward unprecedented bailout of failing coal plants.
What we're seeing with this decision here is that it's given a lie to the idea that the Trudeau government is really serious about tackling climate change.
Canada's Prime Minister nationalizes controversial tar sands pipeline. New renewable electricity surpasses new fossil fuel generation. Plus, G7 nations subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of $100 billion a year, despite pledges.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
This guy could tweet about the Hawaii volcano. Would he make it about him? I'm orange and gassy. Where's my headline?
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, speaking of volcanoes, we've all been watching this volcano in Hawaii and sort of out of nowhere, a deadly eruption down in Guatemala.
Yes, you're right. Down in Hawaii, residents living on the flanks of the Kilauea volcano have had some time to evacuate in advance of slow-moving lava that's destroyed nearly 120 homes and a geothermal power plant. However, many were not so fortunate in Guatemala, where the aptly named Fuego volcano erupted violently and suddenly on Sunday, with a pyroclastic flow that has reportedly engulfed several villages and killed more than 60 people as of airtime. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., President Trump is trying a new tack to bail out financially struggling coal and nuclear power plants that are unable to compete against cheaper renewables and natural gas. He's ordered Energy Secretary Rick Perry to find ways to save those uneconomical coal and nuclear plants from retirement. And now a leaked administration proposal calls for asserting emergency federal powers to force grid operators to purchase electricity from coal-fired power plants regardless of the cost under the pretense of national energy security. It would be an unprecedented intervention into U.S. energy markets that would raise rates on consumers and increase air pollution.
And for those of you who forgot, this would also be the government picking winners and losers, specifically picking coal and nuclear as the winners and everyone else apparently as the losers.
Yep, and of that new proposal, the nation's largest grid operator, PJM Interconnection, said in a statement, quote, "There is no such need for any such drastic action," and warned that this kind of federal intervention would be damaging to the markets and costly to consumers.
And this is not necessarily going through. This is a draft plan from the Trump administration. They still have yet to announce officially this notion under national security measures.
Yes, it's still just a draft. We'll see if it stays that way. Meanwhile, in Canada, Indigenous tribes, environmental groups, and the province of British Columbia have all condemned Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's decision to purchase the Trans Mountain Pipeline system from Houston-based owner Kinder Morgan for $3.5 billion. Trudeau committed unspecified additional billions in taxpayer money to complete a stalled expansion of the pipeline as well. In an interview on the broadcast, Alex Dukas of the nonprofit group Oil Change International called the nationalization of the pipeline a betrayal of Trudeau's promises to act on climate change.
This is sort of how do we use every government lever at our disposal to support industry and to make sure that these projects go ahead, irrespective of the cost to the Canadian public and irrespective of the environmental and climate damage. They basically pulled one over on the Canadian government for a failing project that they knew wasn't going to get built.
Dukas says that both Trump and Trudeau now appear to be more alike than he had previously hoped.
They're both willing to step in and nationalize parts of the fossil fuel industry, but not for the reasons of a managed decline of the industry to help address climate change. No, it's to prop up the industry and keep the dollars flowing to the petrostate and to coal executives.
And now a new analysis finds that wealthy nations still spend more than $100 billion per year on government subsidies for fossil fuels, despite their pledges to end such subsidies by 2025. In a report released on Monday in advance of the G7 summit in Canada this week, the researchers said, quote, "Governments often say they have no public resources to support the clean energy transition. Yet Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States have taken no steps to phase down the $100 billion a year in support for fossil fuels at home and abroad." Finally, some good news. Reuters reports that a record amount of renewable electricity capacity was installed worldwide last year, as the cost of wind and solar is now even more competitive with fossil fuels. The report found that in 2017, more new renewable energy capacity was added than new fossil fuel generation.
We'll take what we can get. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it appears the worm is going to be in Singapore. Yes, Dennis Rodman, who is one of the few people in the U.S. who've ever been to North Korea and have met face-to-face with the Kim Jong-un. So I guess this is our top diplomatic advisor going forward. Just kind of throwing that out there. But it appears the Hair Summit will go on. And here to share a little thoughts on that, our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome. Glad to be with you.
So the Hair Summit is going to actually happen. We're not pulling out of this. There's not going to be an about face. There's not going to be an angry letter or tweet or anything that's going to blow it up.
Well, I guess that's still possible, but it does appear like it is going to go ahead. I am going to be there. My preparations are all in order. The White House is still helping all of us reporters sort things out. So, yeah, it seems like things are moving ahead. We've gotten over the last 24 hours a few announcements that the sort of photo op or whatever ceremony is going to kick off the talks is scheduled for prime time next Monday. It's the made-for-TV foreign policy spectacle, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Who knows exactly what will kick this off? If you go back to the meeting that Kim Jong-un had with the president of South Korea last month at the demilitarized zone, there was, I don't even know what it was, some sort of honor guard, some soldiers in traditional costumes playing traditional instruments and a procession, a lot of different places for staged photos and things like that before the two men sort of retreated from the public eye and had their talks. So maybe there will be something similar, but yeah, it's a 12-hour time difference, and that means kick it off Tuesday morning in Singapore. Makes for great TV the day before.
How wonderful. And lots of pomp and circumstance, which we know Trump loves, lots of feeding the ego, which I'm sure Un loves as well. So this could just be the narcissist's dream.
It could be. I guess I am a little heartened to see that the White House does appear, and Trump in particular, because the White House saying the White House says something these days doesn't really mean much. Trump has been talking, I think, in more measured terms about what he hopes to achieve with a first meeting. And I think you and I had discussed in sort of the past few weeks that it was sort of unrealistic to assume that one meeting could really fix everything. Right. And now the president is talking about a series of meetings. And even more substantial is that it appears, at least according to Reuters, one report from that news outlet over the past day, that maybe Trump is sort of also putting off the notion that the nuclear element of the negotiations is going to be settled from this one meeting. The talk now is maybe that what these two men are going to agree to is some sort of roadmap to officially end the Korean War, which is still in a state of armistice for more than 6 decades.
Right.
And that would be pretty major, because that has been sort of the reverse order of operations than the one that previous American presidents have felt. They always thought, let's put the end of the Korean War at the end because it's what North Korea sort of wants, and we can give it to them, whereas we want them to do other stuff related to nuclear. So now the thinking is we do this first, and it will lower tensions, and it will undermine the North Korean argument that the U.S. is the aggressor, right? That, you know, we have all our troops in the Korean Peninsula, not to defend our ally, but because we still want to, I don't know, fight the Korean War again and take over North Korea. So White House now says, hey, maybe let's put that first. The previous argument was, hey, if you toss out an end of the Korean War in the beginning of the negotiations before North Korea has given up its nuclear program, it sort of opens up, it plays into this argument on North Korea's part that, oh, now that the war's over, you should get your troops out. Now that the war's over, you should stop your joint military drills with South Korea, which is something we want to continue. So the White House may be shaking up the order of what gets talked about. And I think that sparked concerns, including from Senate Democrats who wrote a letter to President Trump this week saying, hey, they're basically, they didn't say this exactly, but they're discounting or discrediting the notion that President Trump is an effective negotiator at all. They're suspicious he's going to bargain away every bit of leverage that the U.S. and our allies possess here and just going to agree to a bunch of things that look good on paper and then leave all the substantive nuclear stuff for some other date. It's possible that could happen, and the change in the order of operations here makes it possible that's what Trump is going to do. But maybe they're rushing to judgment also, that maybe it is worth thinking whether the Korean War should end before the nuclear issues are touched.
Yeah, I thought it was over. To be honest, we haven't been lobbing bullets at each other for a while.
Yeah,
but the thing is, and I agree. I find that Trump is not Mr. Art of the deal, and I fear that his bloated ego and his high opinion of himself gets our foreign policy in a whole bunch of trouble over once he's long gone. That we're stuck with whatever he decides he wants to give away, and that's the scary thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves that there has not been a long diplomatic process that President Trump has concluded yet, be it I wouldn't even put tax reform as one because it's it's essentially a one-party bill, right? It's not like some negotiation where you have to deal with a serious adversary. Trump has started all these trade initiatives and never wrapped any of them up. He's torn up the Iran deal but not stitched it together. So, we don't know, and I think there's a lot of suspicion about whether he really is capable of actually having the delicate touch to conclude a very tricky negotiation. And I think there will probably be efforts made by American officials trying to, coordinate the protocol of this summit to limit the amount of moments where Donald Trump is near the cameras, especially when he's around Kim Jong-un, so that he doesn't ad-lib his way into worsening the U.S.-Korea crisis. But again, you can never really rule out the possibility that he isn't going to, go off script and sort of
start the war all over again.
So start it over, or just step on some other delicate part of this talk.
What I do think is cute, though, is that you didn't think that the Democrats were serious adversaries. I do think that's cute.
Well, I mean, look, he had to deal with a few Republican possible defections on things like tax reform, but
right.
There's nothing really that he's done so far domestically that mirrors the adversarial sort of management of an adversarial relationship of the sort that is going to come up in the North Korea talks.
No, well, maybe somebody will kneel during the national anthem. Let's move on. The UN is criticizing us for holding children in dog crates. Is that right? How dare they?
Yeah,
How dare they tell us what we can't do with immigrant children?
Well, we are. The international law thinks that we do need to listen to what the rest of the world thinks. There is a treaty called the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the U.S. signed but didn't ratify, but it basically says that you can't deprive a child of his or her liberty unlawfully or arbitrarily. If you're going to detain a child...
Unless they're illegal, Luke, unless they're illegal.
Yeah.
They're not even human.
Right.
They're not even human. They're illegal.
Yes. That certainly seems to be the animus behind this very punitive no tolerance policy.
And as you can tell, it's really one of these things that I don't mean to keep cutting you off, but it's one of these things that I literally cannot believe this is how, in this day and age, after all the things we've done as a nation and all the things that we've looked back on and said that was probably a bad idea, that we've gone ahead and done this anyway, while simultaneously looking around the world and saying that other people are screwing up. I just find it really quite amazing.
You should listen to the Hugh Hewitt Jeff Sessions interview that I think aired today, in which you have Hugh Hewitt, and this is maybe an anachronistic phrase in American politics, it's sort of making the George W. Bush style compassionate conservative argument for, hey, we got to keep families together, and certainly there's a way to process adults for illegal entry into the United States, well, at least keeping their children with them in a detention facility.
Yeah, you can blow them up altogether. I get it.
Well, I mean, look, that's where we were for a long time, and it does seem like there has been no explanation given for why exactly that didn't work, other than we could be harsher on these people and be more punitive and try to dissuade them from coming. And you can't even get this administration to come around to this argument that there isn't extreme psychological duress that a child is going to suffer, perhaps for the rest of their life, because of the way they're being treated. And the fact that, U.S. senators can't even go into facilities to see the conditions that these children are being subjected to is really upsetting. So I think the UN has a great case to be made here.
No, I'm with you, but you wonder how many of these kids are going to turn out to be terrorists in the future. And because, look, if you took my kid and subjected my kid to that, you'd have problems. I mean, I'm going for somebody. And I think every parent feels that way. And the fact is that we've taken 1,500 kids and lost them. I mean, they're probably somewhere, but I guess they still don't know where, right?
I'm not caught up to speed on that. I don't even really want to weigh in. I feel like I've heard some good reports that suggest that was maybe blown out of proportion a little bit, but at the very least, I don't see how you can, on one hand, say that you care about the life of everybody and the value of a family, and then you are willing to. You can still deport these people if that's what your agenda is, and just keep families together in prison and then kick them out unceremoniously. It's not the policy I would advocate, but that's what we did before, and it wasn't broken. In fact, the immigration flows should have been going in a way that would have made this administration happy, but they want to dial up the pressure even more, and I'm glad to see the UN pointing to international law that every other country on earth abides by. The U.S. is the only country that's not a signatory or a ratifier of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that's, I think, a real shame.
That's because we're Americans, damn it. We're number one. We're the best.
Yeah.
We're a good, God-fearing Christian nation. All that, and then some. Let's go on. Iran. Evidently, they're going to start ramping up the nuke stuff soon. Is that going to happen?
Yeah. This is what they are threatening to do, is to increase the purity of uranium that they're going to enrich. This is a little technical. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but you need basically 90% enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon. The Iran nuclear deal capped Iran at 3.67%, so well short of the enrichment levels needed to produce a bomb. They're saying, hey, if the Iran deal comes apart, we're ready, and they've actually submitted this in writing to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the plan that they will use to go back to 20% uranium enrichment, which is, the numbers are a little deceiving. It is much closer to a nuclear weapon breakout than the 3.67%. And that's the level of enrichment they were doing before the Iran deal. I look at this, and I really see in Iran's threat here the beginning of an arms race between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has said if Iran at all begins to increase its enrichment, they're going to pursue nuclear weapons.
They'll just buy them from the U.S.
Right. The U.S. would be happy to provide, a moment's notice, despite decades of pursuit of non-proliferation.
So this is what's known as, is this winning? Are we winning yet? Are we tired of winning yet?
Well, look, if your stated policy is to, give the Saudis everything they want and to pursue any sort of containment strategy against Iran, no matter the regional consequences, then that's what the Trump administration would consider winning. And I see what Iran is doing here, basically saying, look, if we think there's a chance that overnight Saudi Arabia, our biggest adversary, could become a nuclear power, we're going to start loading up, filling the car up with gas, right? Because that's a trip we're going to need to go on as well. So we've gone from, again, a state where the Iran nuclear deal was working, a month ago, to one where within weeks or months, we could see Iran and Saudi Arabia, sort of your regional equivalent of an India-Pakistan showdown, two new adversaries acquiring nuclear weapons, again, undoing decades of efforts to halt the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world.
Well, it's a good thing we spend more on military than any other country in the world, and then multiply that by some, because evidently we're going to need it, right? Because I look at this other tidbit you've got out here that the U.S. is calling on NATO to ready soldiers to defend against Russia and their aggression. We're going to be fighting a war with Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Russia. Where does it end?
This, to me, seems less like an actual preparation or eagerness to fight Russia and more of just sort of an excuse to figure out what to do with the big budget that the Pentagon has now. And, hey, we've got to just sort of ramp up preparedness on all fronts right now. Yep. And look, there is certainly a security threat posed by Russia. It's hard to... If you're a Ukraine or Georgia expert or anyone in the Baltic, it's very understandable that you're concerned about the revival of the Russian military over the last decade and their willingness to use that military force. There's always, you've got to look at both capacity and willingness to use force, and Vladimir Putin has demonstrated that willingness over and over. And so what Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, is going to present to NATO this week is a plan to have 30 land battalions, 30 air fighter squadrons, and 30 Navy ship groups ready to deploy within 30 days of being put on alert. So it's called the 30-30-30-30 plan, which is not very catchy. And that is going to, if it were to be adopted by NATO, a big increase in what NATO's capable of doing. There was a RAND study, I think a year and a half ago, that basically said Britain, France, and Germany can field about 10 battalions between them, but it's going to really tax them. This is asking for 3 times that from the NATO countries. So this would be a major upgrade in the NATO force posture. Again, I'm not really sure exactly what threat the U.S. is most worried about here and how
China,
were Russia to pour all of its resources towards invading a Baltic country, if even 30 battalions is going to stop that, I'm skeptical. But there does seem to be a U.S. push to go beyond just asking these countries to hit, 2% of GDP for military spending. We're actually now saying, here's the actual troop contributions we want to see you guys putting forward.
It'll be interesting. And don't forget China and the South China Sea and all the stuff that's going on there and all the fun we're going to have there soon.
Yeah, it's it's a world of military threats, but also, opportunities for procurement. I'm cynical on that.
There you go. It's good for the military industrial complex. Manufacturing should be ramped up in China really, really soon, and we can buy all of our armaments from the Chinese.
Yeah.
Because that's, look, I've read the book. There are thousands of things that our military needs that we don't produce anymore. That we have to get from the Chinese, and it's really just it's quite remarkable to me. And finally, evidently another businessman might be possibly thinking about 2020, throwing his hat in the ring. Free coffee for everybody, something.
Yeah, we're talking about the former head of or executive chairman of Starbucks who's stepping down, Howard Schultz, who, if you read his sort of retirement letter that he sent out to Starbucks staff, certainly sounds like he's talking like a politician, at least. And look, I think in a lot of good ways, he's brought sort of a political sensitivity to his, corporate life, that he has, he pledged to hire refugees after the travel ban. He's talked about how, economic growth indicators that the politicians point to are very different than the situation Americans feel, many of them left behind by this very, quote unquote, profitable economy we have right now. So I think he's certainly been making moves which suggest an interest in broader, policies. The question is, he was talked out of apparently a run for office in 2016. Is he feeling different now that another, sort of celebrity CEO or business person is occupying the White House? We'll see. I think I was reading a Vox article today that rightly pointed out, look, he finds himself a little bit on the political center right now. He's very concerned about the deficit. Would this kind of platform really cut it for Democrats who are itching for something a lot more progressive, perhaps, than what Howard Schultz might be able to offer. But interestingly, we have another big name entering the fray here.
It'll be interesting. And one of the things I do like about him is evidently he offers his part-time workers health insurance. That's something very, very few companies do these days. And it's, it's one of those things where you just go, not a bad choice, and good on him. We'll see what comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say, this is a story I don't know if I had time to throw in, but India has said they are going to cut out disposable plastic bags by 2022, that they're going to ban them. And I think this is great news for World Environment Day. I've made the switch over to the metal straws and have been, ditching plastic bags. And I think it's just great to have more and more big countries getting on board with this. It's well overdue in the U.S., where over Memorial Day, I went into a game store and got a Magic the Gathering booster pack, and they gave me a plastic bag for this one thing. And I looked at the guy and just said, really crazy. Come on now. So awareness needs to change on this issue. India, kudos to them. I don't know why we need to wait 5 years. Let's do it, or do it 4 years, do it now. But hey, it's definitely a step in the right direction for the fastest growing economy. It's about time we get something like that here in the United States.
No, I'm right there with you. In fact, my wife has, guilted the entire family off of straws entirely because of the poor turtles in their noses. At least she read something about the straws get stuck in turtles' noses or something. And we've been trying to get off the plastic bags for years. My wife has the tote bags that stores will give you, and reusable, and they're sturdy and all of that. That's the way we should have been going a long time ago. But we're usually slow.
Yeah, the speed with which the straw issue sort of shot into widespread consciousness, which is seemingly in the last few weeks. Of course, people have been probably screaming about that for years, but I feel like it's
about a year ago when
so much recently. So that's good that the change can be that quick. Now we just need to take it beyond straws and really look for other systematic, problematic behavior.
There you go. Good stuff. Luke, appreciate the time.
Thank you. Take care.
As always, our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show. Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
So, interesting story coming out of Florida today. And again, this is one of those moments where you go, this is how crazy it's gotten in this country with these gun nuts and these internet trolls and all this nonsense. Evidently, David Hogue, one of the kids from the Parkland shooting and the organizer of this bus tour that's going to be happening over the next several weeks. And good on them. Look, he was absolutely right. It's time for change. It's the Road for Change bus tour that they were going to kick off. I'm pretty sure it's I actually don't remember the exact date. But anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is evidently someone today called and reported someone walking around their home, this David Hogue's family home. And the SWAT team came and surrounded, all this stuff. And, this is another one of these moments of the right-wing trolls intimidating, because they put this kid's home address on this 4chan discussion board and also on the 8chan, because evidently 4chan they're calling cuck-chan because, they censor some things, because you can't really be outwardly racist and you can't really threaten to kill people. But over on 8chan, I'm assuming, I guess, because that's not cuck-chan, evidently this is where this stuff goes on. And, this is the kind of stuff that is infuriating. And it's meant to intimidate. It's meant to harass. And it's meant to silence. And, in this day and age of no privacy, and in this day and age of everything's available and, everyone knows everything, this is scary stuff. And, the message that comes out of this for this kid, and I give him credit, because I don't know that at 18 years old, I would have had the wherewithal, the maturity, the mental capacity to deal with what he has done. I would have most certainly been the one to lash out and want to strangle somebody. But he has chosen, I think, the right path, the high road, if you will, and not backing down. And, good on them. But the sad thing is this stuff can and sometimes does turn violent. And the fact that someone posted his home address to other crazy people, and I'm not putting down people with mental illness struggles. I'm using that purely as these lunatic gun nuts who, they're just itching and dreaming and fantasizing about shooting somebody. That's what's scary to me. And I wish this kid the best. And look, it's one of those moments where we should all be standing in solidarity with this kid and pushing our elected leaders to do something about this kind of harassment and intimidation. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Quick 2 hours. Looking forward to getting back here tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like tides flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the